before 2008, before 1929. There was 1907, and the men who saved it built a system that made all future crises possible. America's economy in 1907 also made sure it would keep crashing forever. And we built a monument to thank them. Here's what nobody tells you when they teach you about the 2008 financial crisis, or the 1929 crash, or the dot-com collapse, or any of the other times the economy fell off a cliff and millions of ordinary people lost everything. Every single one of those disasters was made possible by the same system. And that system was designed deliberately, in secret, on a private island, by the very men who had just caused the crisis it was supposedly fixing. This is the panic of 1907. You've never heard of it, and that's exactly the problem. Let me explain it like you're 5. It's October 1907, New York City. The stock market is collapsing. Banks are failing. People are lining up outside their local branches, desperate to pull their savings before the money disappears. Some of them wait all day. Some of them lose everything anyway. There is no Federal Reserve. There is no government bailout. There is no safety net of any kind. When the banking system starts to collapse, there's only one thing standing between America and total economic ruin. One man. His name is J.P. Morgan, and he is not elected. He holds no government office. He answers to nobody. He is simply the richest, most powerful banker in the United States. And for 3 weeks in the autumn of 1907, he personally decides which banks survive and which ones don't. He locks a group of New York's most powerful bankers in his private library and refuses to let them leave until they agree to pool their money and stop the panic. He choreographs every move. He decides who gets rescued and who gets sacrificed. It works. The panic stops. The economy stabilizes. The newspapers call him a hero. Here's what the newspapers didn't say. In the middle of the crisis, while everyone was distracted, Morgan quietly arranged for one of his firms to acquire a failing steel company at a bargain price. A deal that cemented his industrial empire. He didn't just show up to save the day. He positioned himself to profit from the chaos before the smoke had even cleared. He was the fireman. He was also holding the match. And here's where it gets important. Because one man having that much power over an entire country's economy scared people. The right people. Politicians, regulators, ordinary citizens who had watched their savings vanish while a banker in a private library decided their fate. The lesson of 1907, the one everyone agreed on, was simple. This can never happen again. America needs a system, a real one that doesn't depend on whether J.P. Morgan is in a good mood. That desire, completely understandable, completely reasonable, is what made everything worse. Because the real consequence of 1907 wasn't the panic itself. It was the solution. In 1910, 6 men got on a train. They used fake names. They traveled in a private rail car, curtains drawn, to a remote private island off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island. Nobody was supposed to know they were there. Nobody was supposed to know they were meeting at all. If any journalist had spotted them together, the whole operation would have been blown. Those 6 men represented roughly a quarter of the world's entire wealth. A sitting U.S. senator, the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, and representatives of the Morgan banking empire and the Rockefeller financial interests, the 2 most powerful financial dynasties in America. Institutions that had spent decades competing with each other, now sitting at the same table, behind closed doors, drafting the future of American money. They spent 9 days on that island. When they left, they had a draft plan for what would eventually become the Federal Reserve System, the Central Bank of the United States, founded in 1913, which controls American monetary policy to this day. Read that again slowly. The men who had just demonstrated in 1907 that private bankers could not be trusted to manage a financial crisis because they would use it to enrich themselves were the exact same men who designed the institution that would manage all future financial crises. They wrote the rules. They shaped the structure. They decided how much power the new system would have, who would sit at its center, and how decisions would be made. And they made sure, very carefully, that the new system would work in ways that happened to be extremely good for banks like theirs. The public was told the Federal Reserve was a shield for ordinary people, a guardian against panic, a lender of last resort that would stabilize the economy when markets went haywire, and in certain narrow ways, it does exactly that. But it was also architected by the people with the most to gain to ensure that when the banking system made catastrophic mistakes, the pain would flow downward to workers, homeowners, retirees. while the institutions at the top got protected, recapitalized, and sent back into the market to do it all again. That pattern has a name now. Economists call it moral hazard. The idea is simple. If you know you'll be rescued, you take bigger risks. And if the rescue is guaranteed for the biggest players and never available to the smallest ones, then the system doesn't just tolerate recklessness at the top, it rewards it. Jekyll Island didn't just produce a banking law, it produced a philosophy, and that philosophy has been compounding ever since. Basel style. 1929. The Federal Reserve, barely 15 years old, tightened monetary policy at exactly the wrong moment. Credit dried up, the stock market crashed, banks collapsed across the country. The Great Depression followed, a decade of unemployment, poverty, and despair that touched virtually every family in America. The banks that had spent the 1920s inflating the speculative bubble survived far better than the ordinary people who had trusted them with their savings. 1930. The Fed intervened after Black Monday, the single largest one-day stock market crash in history. The system held, but the intervention sent a signal that would echo through every trading floor on Wall Street for the next 20 years. If you're big enough, the central bank will catch you. Take the bet. The downside is someone else's problem. 1931. The dot-com bubble burst. The Fed slashed interest rates to cushion the crash. Those low rates flooded the economy with cheap money, which had to go somewhere. It went into housing. It was inflated. It kept inflating. Mortgage lenders stopped asking questions. Banks started bundling bad loans into products so complex that almost nobody understood what was inside them. They sold those products to pension funds, to retirement accounts, to ordinary people who had no idea what they were buying. 1932. The whole structure collapsed. Banks that had spent a decade manufacturing and selling fraudulent mortgage products came to the edge of total failure. The Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury intervened with trillions of dollars of public money. The banks got bailouts. The executives kept their bonuses. 13 million Americans lost their homes. Not one senior Wall Street banker went to prison. Every single link in that chain connects back to the same origin point. Not to greed. Greed has always existed. Not to bad regulation. Regulation changes constantly. The thread that runs through every crash, every bailout, every ordinary family that loses everything while the institutions that caused the problem get made whole is the system itself. The system built on that island in 1910 by men who made sure it would protect them first. The Federal Reserve didn't prevent the consequences of financial recklessness. It deferred them, amplified them, and then handed the bill to everyone who had no seat at the table when the rules were written. J.P. Morgan died in 1913, the same year the Federal Reserve was signed into law. His fortune, adjusted for today's money, exceeded $40 billion. He never faced consequences for the conflicts of interest that defined his 1907 intervention. He was mourned as a titan, a stabilizer, a man who had personally held the country together. The men who met on Jekyll Island got their central bank. Their firms, or the firms that absorbed them over the following century, became the primary dealers who sit at the very center of the Federal Reserve System today. They are the institutions through which the Fed conducts its monetary policy. They have been there since the beginning. They helped design the room they still occupy. The Panic of 1907 lasted 3 weeks. The system it produced has now been generating financial crises for over 100 years, each one larger than the last, each one more damaging to the people at the bottom, each one followed by a rescue that mostly benefits the people at the top. And every time a new crisis hits, the same conversation happens. How do we fix the system? How do we make sure this never happens again? And every time, the people closest to the system, the ones with the most to lose if it were genuinely reformed, are the first ones in the room when the new rules get written. One private library, 9 days on a secret island, and a machine that has been running ever since, turning every crash into an opportunity, every rescue into a transfer, every reform into a reason to go back to business as usual. Panic of 1907 didn't destroy the system. It was the system. And you are still living inside it.
If you enjoyed the video, hit subscribe and click the bell button for more updates. See you in the next episode of Stick Market.